She entered the ring to prove that she could stand up to him, but the brutal wrestler brutally beat her and broke her in front of the entire arena. The crowd froze in shock until Ronda Rousey appeared. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. The roar of the crowd was deafening, an ocean of noise that vibrated through the steel and concrete bones of the Grand Slam Wrestling Arena in Los Angeles. The place was alive with restless anticipation, its sheer size magnifying every sound, every flicker of light. Over 40,000 people filled the seats, a pulsing human tide swathed in the glow of massive LED screens suspended above the ring. High-powered spotlights swept across the stands like the eyes of searchlights, bathing the audience in sudden flashes of brilliance before snapping back to the ring, where the squared circle lay waiting beneath its canopy of banners and rigging. It was a temple to spectacle, to the raw collision of athleticism and theater that defined professional wrestling. But tonight there was something different in the air. The energy was hotter, sharper, tinged with an almost predatory curiosity, as though the crowd sensed they were on the brink of witnessing something more volatile than scripted chaos. Thick beams of neon light cut across the arena, casting shifting shadows on the ring apron as pyrotechnics hissed in the corners. The bass-heavy music pounding from the speakers rolled over the audience in waves, a sonic assault that made the floor tremble. Giant screens looped clips of previous matches, the camera cutting between slow-motion highlights of brutal slams, flashy aerial moves, and the exaggerated gestures of wrestlers basking in their own manufactured glory. Between these clips ran a carousel of sponsor logos, energy drinks, sports apparel, streaming platforms, all vying for attention as if each wanted to lay claim to the frenzied atmosphere building toward a crescendo. In the center of it all, beneath the glare of the lights and the noise of 40,000 throats, was the ring. Spotless canvas, taut ropes gleaming under the glare, a platform raised for drama and spectacle. The smell of hot food, greasy fries, nachos smothered in cheese, popcorn mingled with the scent of sweat and anticipation, the air thick and warm with the collective body heat of the crowd. Cameras moved on their tracks along the perimeter, zooming in on animated fans, waving signs, or painted up in the colors of their favorite stars. Suddenly, the music shifted to an aggressive, thundering rhythm. The crowd surged to its feet, roaring with a mixture of excitement and dread. His name flashed across the screens in bold crimson letters: Bruce Titan Grant. The man himself emerged from behind the curtain in a storm of strobes and pyrotechnics, a towering figure swaggering down the ramp with a cruel grin splitting his face. At 6'5" and easily over 270 pounds, he looked less like a performer and more like a force of nature sculpted for intimidation. His shaved head gleamed under the lights, his heavily tattooed arms bulging as he flexed for the cameras, showing off a physique built as much for dominance as for showmanship. Bruce played to the audience with the ease of a man who had long mastered his role as both hero and villain. He wore a sleeveless leather vest studded with chrome, each movement exaggerated and deliberate, as though even his walk was designed to command attention. Some fans cheered wildly, holding up signs emblazoned with his name, while others booed just as loudly, their jeers swallowed up by the sheer volume of the moment. This was what Bruce thrived on: the divided reaction, the polarization, the sense that he was the man everyone either wanted to be or desperately wanted to see destroyed. As he climbed into the ring and snatched a microphone from the announcer, the sound system cut abruptly. The roar of the crowd dimmed just enough for his voice to dominate, deep and booming as it carried to the farthest corners of the arena. He smirked as he paced the ring like a predator, his boots heavy on the canvas. "This," he began, his voice dripping with contemptuous confidence, "is supposed to be the best wrestling has to offer? This? A parade of mediocrity and weaklings hiding behind flashy moves and fake bravado?" His words drew a mix of cheers and boos, exactly as he intended. He tilted his head back, reveling in it. "I've carried this company on my back for years. I've crushed every so-called contender who's had the guts to step in here with me. But tonight..." He stopped, letting the silence stretch, savoring it. Tonight, I'm going to prove what I've been saying all along, that this ring is no place for the weak, no place for pretenders, no place. He lowered the microphone and let his gaze sweep across the crowd, his smile curling wider. For women, the reaction was instantaneous. The arena exploded with noise, a clash of cheers from his devoted fans and outraged boos from those who despised him. Signs in the crowd bobbed frantically, some reading Titan rules. Others defiantly scrawled with slogans backing the women's division. Bruce laughed, soaking it in, then pointed toward the entrance ramp. "So here's the deal," he barked. "If there's a single woman back there who thinks she belongs in this ring with me, come out now. Prove me wrong. Show me what you've got." His challenge echoed, bouncing off the high rafters and into the stunned hush that followed. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen stayed black, the entranceway empty. The tension was electric, a taut wire ready to snap. Then, almost timidly at first, a new theme song hit, fast-paced, determined, underscored by sharp percussion. A figure appeared at the top of the ramp, and the arena erupted. Kayla Torres stepped out into the blinding light, her expression fierce despite the tremor of nerves she couldn't quite hide. She was young, no more than 22, her toned frame clad in a crisp blue and white outfit that gleamed under the spotlights. Her brown hair was tied tightly in a braid, swinging against her back as she strode forward with purpose. Kayla was a rising star in the women's division, beloved by fans for her grit, her underdog victories, and her ability to connect with the audience. She had none of Bruce's size or weight, none of his years of experience, but she had heart, and the crowd responded to it instantly. Signs supporting her shot into the air as chants of her name battled against the chorus of Bruce's supporters. The cameras cut to the commentary desk where two announcers leaned forward, their voices tense. They questioned whether this was wise, whether Kayla understood the risk she was taking. Bruce stood in the ring, his grin widening as she walked down the ramp. He gestured mockingly, inviting her in with sweeping arms, as if daring her to cross into his domain. Kayla climbed onto the apron, pausing only for a second to look out at the crowd. Her eyes swept across the thousands of faces, some cheering, some jeering, all watching, and she drew a deep breath, steadying herself. This was her moment, reckless or not. With a sharp nod, she ducked between the ropes and entered the ring. The noise of the arena swelled again, a fever pitch of adrenaline and spectacle. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, officially declaring the impromptu match. The referee hurried in, gesturing wildly, clearly uncomfortable with what was unfolding, but powerless to stop it. Bruce rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck, staring down at Kayla with predatory amusement. Kayla raised her fists, shifting her stance into readiness. The sight of her small but unyielding against Bruce's towering frame lit something in the crowd. Even those who doubted her couldn't look away. The energy built higher, the tension drawing tighter, until it felt as if the air itself was quivering under the weight of what was about to happen. The bell rang, sharp and final, slicing through the chaos. And just like that, the stage was set. The bell's sharp chime still rang in the air, as Bruce advanced with the swagger of a man certain of his dominance. His boots struck the mat with heavy, deliberate thuds, each step radiating menace. Kayla held her ground, light on her feet, her fists raised, her expression tight with focus and determination. The crowd roared around them, their voices colliding into an indistinguishable storm of sound. Chants of support and derision tangled together. For an instant, it was just noise and light, the ring beneath them glowing under the weight of anticipation. Bruce lunged forward without warning, his massive hands shooting out in a lightning-quick grab. Kayla twisted away, her body reacting on instinct, narrowly avoiding his grasp. The crowd gasped, a ripple of surprise running through the sea of faces. But Bruce laughed, shaking his head as if humoring her resistance. He charged again, and this time he caught her, one arm wrapping around her waist in a crushing grip. Without hesitation, he hoisted her into the air and slammed her back first onto the mat with a bone-rattling impact that reverberated through the arena. The audience erupted, half in cheers for Bruce's display of power, half in horrified gasps for Kayla. She arched in pain, air forced from her lungs, but grit pushed her back onto her feet. Bruce circled her with a predator's grin, drawing out the moment for the cameras. He gestured grandly toward the audience, inviting their reaction, then pointed to Kayla as if to mock her. The jeers of his supporters rolled like thunder, while Kayla's fans shouted desperately, urging her to fight back. Kayla darted in low, her speed her only weapon, landing a quick strike to Bruce's ribs. He grunted but barely flinched, spinning toward her with a wide swing that she ducked beneath. For a fleeting second, her movement drew cheers, her agility on display against his brute force. She sprang upward, using the ropes for momentum, and delivered a sharp kick to his chest that made him stumble back a step. The crowd howled, energy surging at the unexpected shift, but Bruce's expression darkened instantly. What had begun as a show was becoming something else. He lunged with a brutal tackle, driving Kayla into the corner turnbuckle so hard the ring shuddered. His forearm pressed against her throat for just a second too long, his weight pinning her there, before the referee intervened with a frantic gesture to break. Bruce backed off slowly, smirking as if to remind everyone who was in control. His defiance of the rules part of his twisted performance. Kayla stumbled out of the corner, catching her breath, sweat already dampening her hairline. Determined, she bounced off the ropes, trying to use momentum to her advantage. She ran toward Bruce, leaping into a spinning kick aimed at his head. He caught her midair. The audience gasped as his hands clamped around her, halting her movement effortlessly. With cruel theatrics, he lifted her above his head, parading her for the cameras before hurling her down to the mat in a display of raw strength. The thud was sickening. Kayla lay motionless for a heartbeat before rolling onto her side, clutching her ribs. Bruce stood over her, arms raised, shouting at the audience like a conqueror, demanding recognition. He stomped one boot down near her head, the sound cracking sharply against the canvas, drawing boos and cheers alike. He taunted her to stand, waving his hands dramatically for effect. The commentators at ringside were nearly shouting over each other, one insisting this had gone too far, the other urging Kayla to stay down for her own safety. But Kayla pushed herself up again. Pain twisted her face, but she forced herself upright, trembling slightly, determination blazing through her exhaustion. The crowd rallied to her courage, their chants swelling like a wave. "Kayla! Kayla!" She sprang forward in one last desperate strike, landing a clean hit to Bruce's jaw that snapped his head back. For a split second, the arena exploded in hope. Bruce wiped his mouth, his smile gone. He grabbed her arm before she could retreat and yanked her toward him like a rag doll, spinning her in one swift motion and throwing her down again with devastating force. The mat rattled beneath the impact. Kayla's body curled instinctively, her breathing ragged and shallow. Then, as if to punctuate his dominance and humiliate her beyond question, Bruce climbed onto the ropes. The lights swung to him in automatic choreography, and the screens magnified his figure, muscles flexing as he raised his arms to the roaring crowd. He perched on the top rope, his silhouette towering against the glow of the screens, then launched himself into the air, his massive body arced downward like a hammer. He came crashing down on Kayla with full force, a theatrical maneuver turned brutal in its execution. The sound of impact echoed like a gunshot. Kayla's body jolted violently beneath him and then went limp. Gasps erupted through the arena, a wave of horror overtaking even those who had cheered for him. The referee rushed forward, waving frantically for Bruce to back off as medics spilled from the sidelines. Bruce stood, raising his arms in mock victory, grinning down at Kayla's unmoving form as though he had just secured a championship win. The crowd erupted, split between furious boos and wild applause, the chaotic noise shaking the rafters. The cameras caught everything, his triumphant pose over her prone body, the medics kneeling beside her, the referee shouting for order that would not come. Kayla's chest rose and fell shallowly as the medics assessed her. One carefully cradled her head, while another checked her ribs, their expressions tight with urgency. They signaled for the stretcher. The sight sent ripples of unease through the crowd. The noise dimmed slightly, confusion seeping in as fans realized this was no longer scripted entertainment, but a real injury unfolding before their eyes. Bruce strutted around the ring, unfazed, flexing his arms toward the cameras. He bellowed something inaudible over the din, pointing down at Kayla as if to mock her further. His fans cheered wildly, but an undercurrent of discomfort rippled through the rest of the audience. On social media, the broadcast was already trending. Clips of the devastating slam and the top rope dive exploding across timelines with captions ranging from outrage to admiration. As the medics secured Kayla onto the stretcher, her face pale, her braid falling loose against her shoulder, chants of her name rose again, softer now, aching with worry rather than hype. Bruce leaned casually against the ropes, smirking down at her as she was carried out. He basked in the reaction, his ego fueled by the chaos he had created. For the first time that night, though, the celebratory roar of the crowd wavered. Disquiet settled like a shadow over the arena. Cameras caught uneasy faces in the audience, parents glancing at their children, fans whispering to each other. The spectacle had shifted. What had begun as entertainment now felt like something far uglier. A line crossed under the brightest lights imaginable. Bruce raised his arms one final time, playing to the cameras with theatrical bravado. But even amid the cheers of his most loyal fans, there was a shift. The energy was different now, rawer, heavier, as if the entire arena sensed that something had gone wrong in ways they couldn't quite name. And then, suddenly, the lights dimmed. The music cut abruptly. The arena plunged into an expectant hush. Every voice silenced as the screens above the ring flickered, their glow washing over the stunned faces of the crowd. Something was coming. Something that would change the course of the night forever. The sudden darkness that swept through the arena silenced the crowd instantly, their restless murmur fading to a sharp and electric hush. The only sound that remained was the faint whine of cooling speakers and the distant hum of equipment as the house lights dimmed entirely, plunging the vast space into shadow. Thousands of cell phone screens lit up like scattered stars in the stands, casting faint blue glows on the upturned faces of the audience, every pair of eyes fixed on the entrance ramp. Even Bruce, standing in the ring with his arms raised in self-satisfaction, froze mid-pose, his grin faltering slightly as he glanced toward the stage. Then with a sudden burst, a single spotlight cut through the darkness, landing squarely on the entrance. The massive screens flared to life, not with another sponsor or replay of Bruce's dominance, but with a single name, white letters bold against a black backdrop. Ronda Rousey. The reaction was immediate. The arena detonated in an eruption of sound so deafening it almost felt physical. A wall of noise pressing against the eardrums as thousands of fans leapt to their feet. Cheers and shouts cascaded from every tier, echoing high into the steel rafters. Ronda appeared at the top of the ramp without fanfare, her presence alone commanding more attention than any pyrotechnic display could have. She was dressed simply in a black zip-up jacket, dark athletic pants and boots, her hair tied back in its familiar braid. There were no exaggerated gestures, no theatrics, only the sharp, unflinching expression on her face and the steady, deliberate stride that carried her forward through the blinding spotlight. The cameras zoomed in on her, broadcasting her image onto every screen in the arena. Her eyes were locked on the ring, focused entirely on Bruce, who now stood frozen in place. His smirk returned, but it was tighter this time, forced, his fingers flexing slightly at his sides as he adjusted his stance. He looked out toward the audience, playing to them with exaggerated shrugs, but even through the posturing, it was clear his attention was fixed on the woman approaching him. Ronda moved down the ramp with unhurried precision, cutting through the frenzied noise around her like a blade. Fans along the barricades reached out, shouting her name, holding their phones aloft to record every step. But she never broke her gaze from the ring. Behind her, the screens replayed footage from her career, armbar victories, championship wins, the moments that had made her a legend both inside the cage and out. Each clip seemed to pour fuel onto the fire of the crowd's excitement, their cheers building into a steady chant. "Ronda! Ronda!" "Ah, you're one." Bruce leaned casually against the ropes, feigning indifference as he pointed at her and mouthed something toward the hard camera, his exaggerated expressions crafted for the audience. But there was a stiffness in his movements now, a slight shift of weight from foot to foot that betrayed the unease beneath his bravado. Ronda reached ringside and climbed the steel steps without hesitation. The cameras caught the tightness in her jaw as she glanced briefly toward the stretcher at the far end of the ramp, where medics still worked to wheel Kayla away. For a fleeting moment, her expression softened, her eyes following the young wrestler's pale face. Kayla's eyes opened just enough to meet hers, and even through the pain etched into her features, a flicker of recognition passed between them. It was wordless, but in that instant, it was as if Kayla had passed her the baton, the silent hope that someone stronger would finish what she had begun. Ronda stepped onto the apron and ducked between the ropes with fluid ease. The crowd's roar surged to another peak, cameras flashing as if desperate to preserve the image of her standing there at last, face to face with Bruce. The towering man straightened, arms folded over his chest, his grin widening once again as he looked down at her. He gestured broadly to the audience, soaking in the noise, and pointed directly at Ronda as if mocking her. But she didn't flinch. She stood her ground in the center of the ring, shoulders squared, boots planted firmly on the canvas, her hands relaxed at her sides. There was no sign of hesitation, no hint of doubt. The contrast between them was stark. Bruce in his leather vest, sweating under the lights, performing to the crowd with exaggerated gestures, while Ronda radiated quiet, controlled authority, unmoved by the theatrics swirling around her. The referee hesitated at the edge of the ring, glancing nervously between them and then toward the officials at ringside, clearly unsure whether to intervene or allow what was coming. His uncertainty mirrored the wider mood of the arena. The audience had shifted from spectacle-hungry excitement to breathless anticipation, sensing they were on the verge of witnessing something far greater than scripted drama. Bruce stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he loomed over her, his shadow falling across her face under the blinding lights. He mouthed more words at her, his tone mocking, as he flexed his arms and gestured grandly to the crowd, playing up every second for maximum attention. He turned briefly to climb the ropes, throwing his arms wide as if to declare himself the victor, before the fight had even begun. Ronda didn't move. She merely tilted her head slightly, watching him with calm precision, her eyes never leaving his form. When he finally turned back toward her, their gazes locked again, the noise of the arena fading into a low hum beneath the intensity of that silent exchange. It was a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, cameras zooming in close on their faces, splitting the screen into a dual portrait of confidence and composure versus arrogance and swagger. Somewhere in the background, Kayla's stretcher disappeared into the tunnel, the curtains swallowing her and the medics whole. The sight shifted something in the atmosphere, tightening it further, as though her departure marked a transition from showmanship to reckoning. The fans sensed it. Chants of Ronda's name grew louder, sharper, no longer mixed with jeers, but unified in a feverish roar. Bruce smirked again, trying to reclaim control, and motioned for a microphone. One was tossed to him from ringside, and he caught it effortlessly, spinning it in his hand before raising it to his lips. His voice boomed across the arena, cocky and derisive, each word dripping with exaggerated disdain. He called her out by name, mocking her MMA background, questioning whether she could even handle a wrestling ring, peppering his insults with smarmy jokes aimed to belittle her. He circled her slowly as he spoke, towering over her, gesturing toward her with taunting flair. The fans booed his every word, but Ronda didn't react. She didn't flinch or move, her gaze steady, her posture perfectly balanced. Her silence became a weapon, amplifying itself with every passing second, until even Bruce's theatrics began to feel hollow in the face of it. The crowd responded to her stillness, the chants shifting again, rhythmic and forceful, building into a thunderous wall of sound that rattled the rafters. When Bruce finished his tirade, holding his arms wide to soak in the mixed reaction, Ronda simply stepped forward. It was a single, precise step, but it cut the distance between them in half, and the arena erupted like a detonated charge. Cameras zoomed in tight on her face as she stared straight up into his, her expression utterly calm, unshaken, as if daring him to make his move. Bruce chuckled low in his chest, tossing the microphone aside with a clatter. The sound echoed in the momentary lull that followed, punctuating the silence like the crack of a starting pistol. The referee hesitated no longer. He gestured frantically to the timekeeper, signaling for the bell, his face pale with apprehension. The sound of that bell rang out sharp and clear, cutting through the chaos. The lights blazed brighter, the cameras locked in, and the audience roared so loudly it felt as though the building itself trembled. And there they were, Bruce and Ronda, standing across from each other in the center of the ring, two figures poised at the precipice of collision. Every cheer, every chant, every ounce of tension that had built over the past hour condensed into this one instant. The spectacle had transformed into something raw and real, and the entire arena seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move. The echo of the bell still hung in the air, like the toll of some ceremonial gong, its sharp tone reverberating against the steel rafters and through the pounding hearts of the audience. The arena, moments ago drowning in deafening chants and frenzied cries, now simmered with a different kind of noise, an undercurrent of anticipation that felt taut and electric, as if the entire building had been strung on a wire about to snap. In the ring, Bruce and Ronda stared at one another, the space between them heavy with a silent dare. His hulking frame shifted slightly, muscles tightening as he prepared to launch himself forward, while she stood composed, her feet rooted firmly on the mat, her posture radiating balance and control. Bruce's smirk returned in full force, that familiar arrogant curl of his lips as he raised his arms to the crowd. He flexed theatrically, pointing toward Ronda, with exaggerated motions meant to belittle her while reveling in his own stature. The audience responded with a clash of noise, half cheering in crude support, half booing loudly enough to shake the walls. He thrived on it, feeding on the chaos like oxygen, his laughter echoing through the microphone he still clutched in one massive hand. "Look at her!" he roared, pacing a slow circle around Ronda, gesturing toward her with a dramatic sweep. His voice, amplified through the sound system, carried every word to the furthest corners of the arena. "This is what they send me? The great Ronda Rousey? I've seen bigger arms on my coffee table." His insults rang out over the jeers, sharp and rehearsed, each jab designed to get under the skin of both his opponent and the crowd. He feigned disbelief, cocking his head as if mocking her very presence. The camera panned close on Ronda's face, capturing every nuance of her expression. Her eyes didn't waver, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. She neither smirked nor frowned. Her silence was louder than any response she could have given, and the longer she held it, the more it cut through Bruce's theatrics. Even the commentators picked up on it, their voices trembling with a mix of awe and tension as they noted how she wasn't playing along with his showmanship. She wasn't reacting. She was waiting. Bruce turned his attention back to her, lowering the microphone and tossing it out of the ring with a casual flick of his wrist. It clattered loudly on the arena floor, a metallic punctuation mark that silenced even the most raucous of the fans for a fleeting second. He stepped closer now, looming over her, his shadow stretching across her stance beneath the harsh spotlight. He chuckled low in his throat, rolling his shoulders as though loosening them before a casual workout, and muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for her in the front row to hear. The referee stood awkwardly between them, glancing nervously toward the officials seated at ringside. But no one intervened. The crowd was too far gone, the cameras too locked in, the broadcast too gripping for anyone to halt what was unfolding. They all understood on some level that this was no longer a scripted performance. It had tipped over the edge into something raw, more dangerous, and infinitely more real. Bruce lunged suddenly, taking a heavy step forward, testing her reaction. His massive frame surged toward her, but she didn't flinch. She shifted her weight subtly, poised but unmoved, her gaze fixed on his shoulders, his hips, every signal of where his power would come from. He stopped short, laughing again, taunting her with his bulk, leaning in close enough for the cameras to catch the sneer on his face. Then he pulled back and began to pace, prowling the ring like a lion in a cage, gesturing to the audience once more as if to draw them into his dominance. "You all wanted this, didn't you?" he bellowed. "You begged for it." His words stoked the flames of the crowd, their response deafening in its divided roar. He pointed at Ronda again. When I'm done with her, you'll remember why I'm the king of this ring." Ronda's silence persisted, her stillness coiled and deliberate. Every muscle in her body seemed held in check, a force restrained and waiting for the precise moment to uncoil. She raised her chin slightly, her expression steady, and that tiny movement sent another ripple through the audience. She didn't need words. She didn't need theatrics. The sheer composure she exuded was enough to shift the momentum in her favor without a single strike thrown. The referee swallowed hard and glanced toward the timekeeper. There was no going back now. He stepped aside cautiously, arms raised, signaling the official start. The bell sounded again, this time a definitive call that settled over the crowd like a signal gun before battle. The energy in the building spiked so intensely it was palpable, the kind that made the skin prickle and lungs feel tight. Bruce advanced first, his heavy boots pounding the canvas, testing her defenses with quick feints, jerking motions meant to make her flinch, to break her calm, but she didn't move. He tried again, a wider swing this time, his massive arms sweeping toward her like a battering ram, but she tilted her head back, letting it pass within inches, never once breaking her stance. The crowd roared at the near miss, their excitement now tinged with disbelief. He snarled in frustration, his confidence flashing into irritation as he lunged fully this time, aiming to overpower her in a single motion. But Ronda sidestepped with surgical precision, pivoting lightly on the ball of her foot, her hands barely lifting. Bruce stumbled forward a step, surprised by how effortlessly she'd slipped away. He spun around with a growl, only to find her exactly where she had been, standing calm, composed, watching him as if she had been waiting for this very moment. The audience reacted viscerally. Their roars swelled, the tension snapping into awe at what they were seeing. Even those who had cheered Bruce seconds ago now found themselves leaning forward, drawn by the spectacle of his frustration against her serenity. The commentary team had fallen almost silent, their voices low, reverent, as though instinctively lowering their tone in the presence of something undeniable. Bruce shouted something unintelligible, pounding a fist against his chest, trying to reclaim the dominance slipping through his fingers. He lunged again, faster now, his bulk rushing forward with reckless force. Ronda's body shifted smoothly in response, her movement fluid, almost casual. She let him pass her by again, his momentum carrying him forward into empty space. His hands grasped at air, and he spun around with wide eyes, his breath beginning to come faster now. The arena was no longer split. The energy had shifted entirely. The chants of Ronda's name rolled like thunder through the stands, rhythmic and relentless. The sight of Bruce's mounting frustration only fueled it further, each failed attempt drawing louder cheers for her. He roared in fury and swung wildly, aiming a heavy clothesline meant to level her, but she ducked beneath it in one fluid motion, her braid whipping behind her. The cameras followed every move, replaying the dodge in slow motion on the overhead screens, the crowd reacting explosively to her calm mastery. Bruce turned again, his face twisted with anger, sweat glistening on his forehead under the unforgiving lights. And still, Ronda hadn't thrown a single strike. The tension was now unbearable, the sense of inevitability pressing down like a storm about to break. Bruce's showmanship had evaporated entirely, replaced by raw aggression. He stomped forward again, his shoulders hunched, fists clenched, ready to crush her in sheer brute force. The audience leaned in, thousands of people collectively holding their breath as they waited for her to act, for the moment when restraint would finally give way to precision. Every light, every camera, every eye in the arena was locked on the two figures in the ring. It wasn't a match anymore. It was a countdown, a slow and steady march toward a reckoning that even Bruce himself seemed to sense, though he would never admit it. And then, as his massive form barreled toward her again, Ronda moved. The moment Bruce lunged forward with his bulk, swinging with all the strength that had once terrorized the ring, Ronda's body shifted like water. She stepped aside with a fluid grace that looked almost effortless, pivoting sharply on her heel so that his momentum carried him past her. His massive frame stumbled, thrown off balance by his own aggression, and in that single breath of vulnerability, the crowd roared as though they had witnessed the beginning of a transformation. Bruce recovered quickly, spinning around, his teeth bared and jaw clenched in raw anger. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples under the relentless glare of the lights. He raised his fists again, glaring at Ronda, whose calm, coiled stance remained unchanged. She was watching him intently, measuring every twitch of his muscles, every step he took, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Bruce's roar cut across the arena like a jagged blade, and he charged once more, swinging wildly in a broad, heavy arc meant to smash her down. The sheer force of it made the air seem to ripple, but Ronda ducked beneath it, her head dipping low, her body gliding forward just inside his reach. In one controlled motion, she pivoted around his side, her hands brushing against his ribs lightly, as if guiding his own movement into emptiness. He stumbled again, and the audience's reaction was instantaneous, a surge of disbelief mixed with exhilaration. Chants of her name thundered through the building, waves of "Ronda! Ronda!" that echoed so loudly the mat beneath them seemed to vibrate with it. Bruce spun back toward her, red-faced now, his fury mounting with every failed attempt to connect. He lunged again, his hands outstretched, trying to grab her and use his sheer size to overpower her. This time she met his movement head-on. She sidestepped at the last second and caught his arm in a precise grip, using his own force against him. With a swift pivot of her hips, she flipped him over her shoulder in a textbook throw that sent him crashing onto the mat with a thundering slam. The sound reverberated through the arena, silencing the crowd for a heartbeat before their cheers erupted like a detonated charge. Bruce hit the mat hard, rolling onto his side, stunned. He clutched at his shoulder, groaning, but scrambled to his knees almost immediately, unwilling to stay down for even a moment. His pride burned hotter than his pain, and he glared at her with an expression twisted between humiliation and rage. He charged again with a bull-like momentum, swinging low this time, trying to grab at her legs. Ronda stepped back, dodging cleanly, and as he rose back up, she hooked one arm under his, spinning smoothly and throwing him again, this time with even more precision. His body hit the canvas flat, the impact ringing loud enough for those in the upper seats to hear clearly. The commentators were shouting now, their voices barely audible over the roar of the crowd. The camera feeds captured every detail. Bruce's labored breathing, his fists pounding against the mat in frustration, and Ronda's steady, focused composure. She hadn't broken a sweat, her breathing controlled, her gaze unwavering. Her poise contrasted sharply with Bruce's unraveling bravado. His earlier swagger stripped away to reveal nothing but brute force flailing against mastery. He staggered upright again, slower now, his steps heavier, his breath ragged. He tried another swing, more desperate than deliberate, and Ronda caught his wrist mid-motion. With a twist and a sudden pull, she redirected him downward, sweeping his legs out from under him. He crashed flat once more, groaning audibly this time. The arena exploded in cheers so loud that even Bruce's most ardent supporters fell silent. They couldn't deny what they were seeing, his dominance crumbling, his every attempt dismantled with surgical precision by someone who didn't need spectacle or flash to command the ring. Bruce rolled to his side, pounding the mat with his fist, his expression boiling with desperation. His eyes darted around the crowd, searching for support that was no longer there. He forced himself to stand again, using the ropes for leverage. His muscles trembled visibly under the lights, his massive shoulders rising and falling as he glared at Ronda with a mix of hatred and disbelief. He wiped at his mouth, as though clearing away the taste of failure, and then he roared, pounding his chest, a final attempt to intimidate her. He lunged at her again, this time in a reckless burst, reaching out both hands to seize her. Ronda moved faster than the eye could follow. She slipped beneath his arms, pivoting sharply behind him, and locked her hands around his waist. With perfect technique, she executed a suplex that sent his massive frame arcing backward before slamming into the mat with earth-shaking force. The arena erupted in shock and awe, cameras catching the exact moment of impact. Bruce's face contorted in pain as his back slammed into the canvas. The chants reached a fever pitch now. "Ronda! Ronda!" echoed endlessly, a pounding rhythm that seemed to shake the entire building. Even those who had been cheering for Bruce now found themselves swept up in the tide of her dominance, unable to resist the magnetic draw of precision, dismantling raw violence. Bruce writhed on the mat, struggling to get back up. He clutched at the ropes, pulling himself upright again, leaning heavily against them. His chest heaved, sweat soaking his skin, his earlier cocky grin completely erased. He staggered forward one last time, rage twisting his face. He lunged for her arm, grabbing hold and twisting in the same motion he had used earlier to destroy Kayla. The crowd gasped as he wrenched, attempting to repeat his cruel display, but Ronda's movements were instantaneous and flawless. She spun with his force, reversing his grip in one seamless motion, her hands locking expertly around his wrist. Her body turned sharply, guiding his momentum downward and twisting his arm into a perfect lock. She dropped low, using his size against him, and in an instant Bruce was on his knees, his face contorted in agony, as she pinned him there in a vice-like hold. The pressure was immediate and undeniable, his shoulder wrenched back at an unnatural angle. The cameras zoomed in, catching every detail of his pained grimace, his teeth clenched so tight they might shatter. He pounded the mat frantically, tapping out over and over. The referee lunged forward, signaling furiously, shouting for the break. But Ronda held him there a moment longer, her gaze locked on him with icy control, letting him feel every ounce of the humiliation he had so freely dished out to others. She tightened her hold just enough to make him scream, a sharp, raw sound that cut straight through the roar of the crowd. Then at last she released him, stepping back as he collapsed to the mat, clutching his arm, his breath ragged and broken. The audience erupted, louder than ever, a deafening wave of triumph and vindication. People stood in their seats, screaming, clapping, chanting her name in unison. Cameras flashed everywhere, capturing the image of Bruce sprawled on the mat, his towering figure reduced to a broken heap, while Ronda stood tall, her shoulders squared, her eyes steady and calm, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. Medics rushed into the ring, swarming around Bruce as he rolled onto his side, cradling his arm, his face twisted in pain and humiliation. The referee raised Ronda's hand high, and the sound from the crowd hit a crescendo so powerful it felt like the very air in the arena was vibrating. The overhead screens replayed her decisive reversal in slow motion, the twist, the lock, the tap out, and finally Bruce's collapse. Every detail burned itself into memory, immortalizing the moment. Ronda didn't celebrate. She didn't pose or smile for the cameras. She simply lowered her hand after the referee let go and turned her gaze to the stretcher near the entrance, where Kayla lay watching from the tunnel, her face pale but her eyes wide and shining. Their gazes met across the distance, and for a brief instant, the chaos of the arena seemed to fade, leaving only that silent acknowledgement between them. Bruce was helped out of the ring by medics, his arm immobilized, his head bowed in defeat. His fans were silent now, drowned out by the thunderous ovation that rolled endlessly through the arena. Ronda remained in the center of the ring, composed, unshaken, her presence radiating an authority that silenced even the commentators as they stared down from their booth, almost reverent in their awe. In that moment, it wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. The deafening roar of the crowd seemed to reverberate endlessly, lingering in the cavernous arena long after the referee had raised Ronda's hand in victory. The chants of her name rolled like thunder, shaking the steel rafters above, rising and falling in rhythmic waves that felt primal in their intensity. The overhead screens replayed the final moments again and again. Bruce's desperate grab for her arm, the flawless reversal, the tight lock that forced him screaming to his knees, and the unmistakable tap-out that signaled his defeat. The cameras lingered on his crumpled form being helped out of the ring, his towering figure diminished, his once boastful stride reduced to a hunched shuffle as the medics supported him. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight not only from pain but from the raw humiliation of a man stripped bare before thousands. As Bruce disappeared up the ramp, flanked by trainers and medical staff, the focus of every lens and every eye shifted back to Ronda. She stood alone in the ring, her breath steady, her face calm and unreadable beneath the blinding lights. She didn't raise her arms in triumph, didn't indulge in theatrics, didn't bask in the adoration pouring down from the stands. Instead, she simply turned her head slightly toward the tunnel where Kayla's stretcher had disappeared minutes earlier. For a fleeting moment, the cameras caught her eyes softening, her jaw relaxing almost imperceptibly, a quiet recognition of the injured young woman who had been the spark for this entire night. In the medical bay near the entrance ramp, Kayla lay propped up on the stretcher, her ribs tightly bound, an oxygen mask pressed lightly to her face as medics fussed over her vitals. But her eyes never left the screen mounted in the corner of the room, broadcasting the live feed from the arena. She watched Ronda's silent composure in the ring, her fingers tightening against the thin blanket draped over her. Even through the haze of pain, a fierce spark lit her expression, an almost disbelieving pride that swelled in her chest, forcing tears to prick at the corners of her eyes. She had been humiliated, crushed by Bruce's cruelty, but seeing him undone by Ronda's effortless control felt like vindication, not just for herself, but for every woman who had been dismissed and mocked in this sport. Outside in the arena, the energy shifted again. The chants softened slightly, not in volume but in tone, evolving from pure triumph into something more reverent, almost awestruck. Families clutched at their children, fathers hoisting their daughters onto their shoulders so they could see, pointing to the woman in the ring who had just dismantled the monster that had hurt another young wrestler without remorse. Social media feeds were already ablaze, clips of the fight circulating with captions proclaiming it a historic moment, the turning point of the night. Hashtags tied to Ronda's name trended instantly, alongside phrases calling out Bruce's behavior, his cruel theatrics now dissected under the merciless microscope of public scrutiny. Ronda finally stepped toward the ropes, her movement unhurried, deliberate, and ducked out of the ring. The arena erupted again, camera flashes bursting like fireworks as she walked along the ringside barricade. Fans reached out their hands, shouting her name, but she didn't break her stride. Her focus was singular, her boots striking the metal ramp with steady purpose as she made her way toward the tunnel. The chants followed her, echoing louder than ever, rolling through the rafters like a relentless wave that didn't diminish even as she passed beneath the massive video screen and disappeared backstage. The noise faded slightly in the corridors beyond, replaced by the hum of activity and the murmur of hushed conversations. Crew members, staff, and wrestlers lingering in the hallway all paused as she walked past, their gazes tracking her silently. Some offered nods of respect. Others simply stared, their expressions a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Her presence seemed to carry a gravity that quieted the chaos wherever she stepped, the aura of someone who had not just won a fight, but fundamentally altered the landscape of the night. She entered the medical bay without hesitation, the air inside thick with antiseptic and the soft beep of monitoring machines. Kayla's eyes widened instantly at the sight of her, and even through her exhaustion and pain, a small, trembling smile curved her lips. Ronda approached the stretcher and crouched down slightly so they were level, her hand resting lightly on Kayla's shoulder. No words passed between them at first, but they weren't needed. The connection was silent yet profound, forged in shared understanding. Kayla's lips quivered as if she wanted to speak, but Ronda shook her head gently, her gaze steady and unwavering. That tiny gesture carried more weight than any speech could. It was reassurance, recognition, and a promise all in one. That Kayla had not failed, that her courage had been seen, and that tonight would not be remembered for her defeat, but for what it had inspired. Kayla's eyes welled with fresh tears, and she nodded faintly, her fingers curling weakly against Ronda's sleeve in gratitude. Outside the room, the arena's distant noise persisted like a living thing, but it was no longer just the raucous chaos of entertainment. It was something else now, charged with an undercurrent of change. Already conversations were erupting among fans, pundits, and industry insiders alike. Clips of Bruce's humiliating defeat were dissected frame by frame. His reign of arrogance contrasted brutally against his collapse in front of tens of thousands. More importantly, the footage of Ronda standing tall in the aftermath, poised and disciplined, not triumphant, but resolute, spread like wildfire, accompanied by commentary lauding her composure and condemning the showboating cruelty that had defined Bruce's career. Sponsors released statements within hours, distancing themselves from Bruce's actions during the match and praising Ronda's intervention as an example of true sportsmanship and discipline. Talk shows scheduled emergency segments, booking analysts to discuss how the spectacle had spiraled into something unscripted, raw, and historic. The industry itself seemed to shift beneath the weight of the night's events, a reminder that real skill, real restraint, and real consequences could overshadow even the loudest theatrics. Back in the medical bay, Kayla's coach appeared at the doorway, his expression weary but softened by pride. He exchanged a quiet nod with Ronda as she rose to her feet. Their wordless exchange was mutual acknowledgement, an understanding that tonight, despite its violence and chaos, had marked the beginning of something larger than either of them individually. When Ronda finally stepped back out into the hallway, she passed Bruce being wheeled toward another treatment room. His face was pale, his arm braced tightly against his torso, his eyes avoiding hers entirely. Yet in that fleeting moment, as their paths crossed, there was no arrogance left in him, no smirk, no taunt. Only the hollowed-out look of a man forced to confront a mirror he couldn't escape. Ronda didn't pause or speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Emerging from the backstage corridors into the cool night air beyond the arena, Ronda inhaled deeply. The muted roar of the crowd still reached her even here, carried faintly through the heavy walls, mingled now with the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic flash of camera shutters from lingering reporters at the perimeter. The night sky above was clear, stars faint but present against the glow of the city beyond. She paused for a moment at the edge of the lot, her breath visible in the cool air, letting the quiet settle over her like a balm after the relentless intensity inside. It wasn't victory she felt. It wasn't triumph or celebration. It was something deeper, heavier, but also steadier. Responsibility. The weight of having reminded an entire audience, an entire industry, what true strength looked like. Not spectacle, not cruelty disguised as entertainment, but control, discipline, the power to hold someone's fate in your hands and choose not to destroy them, even when you could. Behind her, the doors opened briefly, and Kayla emerged supported by her coach and medics. Even moving gingerly, pale and bruised, her face was lit with something new. Determination, fierce and alive despite her injuries. She caught Ronda's gaze across the distance, and that same silent exchange passed between them again, this time brighter, stronger. It was a promise unspoken but undeniable that she would heal, return, and stand where Ronda stood tonight someday. As the noise of the arena faded further behind them, Ronda turned her eyes once more toward the city skyline, its lights shimmering faintly in the distance. Tonight would ripple outward, far beyond this place. Parents would tell their children about it. Young girls would watch the footage and see themselves reflected in it. And even those who came for blood, for spectacle, would leave with something they hadn't expected. The quiet, immovable image of a woman who had stood in the center of the storm and turned it into stillness. She stepped forward into the night, the echoes of the chants lingering faintly in her ears, carried like an invisible tide. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would outlast the headlines and the noise, rooted not in the fleeting roar of a crowd, but in the enduring weight of what it meant to stand, to fight, and to show the world the meaning of strength without cruelty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Check out our other videos for more powerful stories like this one. And if this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to see it.